Notice Ezekiel chapter 9. Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 1. Then he called out in my hearing. This is immediately after he describes the group of leaders that were worshiping the sun. In the temple of God, by the way. These are the followers of God that are doing this. It's not the pagans. Immediately after that, it speaks about a group who are going to get a seal on their forehead. They're opposite. Notice verse 1. Then he called out in my hearing with a loud voice saying, let those who have charge over the city draw near, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. And suddenly 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his battle axe in his hand. One man among them was clothed with linen. I don't have time to prove this, but it's Jesus Christ who is clothed with linen and had a writer's inkhorn at his side. In other words, something to seal with. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub where it had been to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed with linen who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city. Which city? Jerusalem. Is this a sealing of God's people or is it a sealing of the pagans? This is happening among God's people. They're worshiping the sun, but there's a group that don't, and they need to receive a seal. Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. Let me ask you, was there a group that sighed and cried about the abominations and did not participate in those abominations, who refused to worship the sun god? Absolutely. And what did they receive? The mark where? On their foreheads. Is there a mark on the forehead in Revelation? Is it just possible that it has something to do with sun worship? We'll come back to that. Verse 5. To the others he said in my hearing, go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eyes spare, nor have any pity. Utterly slay old and young men, maidens and little children and women. But do not come near anyone on whom is the mark. Are those who have the mark protected? Yes, they are. And begin where? At my sanctuary, where the religious leaders were, incidentally. So they began with the elders, where the elders who were before the temple. And some people say, Pastor Bor, are you saying that those who received the seal when Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the city, they were spared? And those individuals who were committing the abominations, those were destroyed? That's exactly what I'm saying, because this is the Old Testament scenario. And so you're saying, Pastor Bor, you're saying that those who worship the sun, those were destroyed, whereas those who kept God's holy Sabbath were spared? Are you saying that Jerusalem was destroyed because they didn't keep the Sabbath? Let's let the Bible tell us. Go with me to Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 27. Jeremiah 17 and verse 27. It's very, very clear. God tells us why he destroyed the city of Jerusalem through Nebuchadnezzar. And he already told us in Ezekiel chapter 9 that those who had the seal on their foreheads would not be destroyed because they were not practicing the abominations. They were not worshiping the sun. Notice Jeremiah 17 verse 27. God says, but if you will not heed me to hallow, that is to sanctify the Sabbath day, such as not carrying a burden when entering the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, what does God say he's going to do? Then I will kindle a fire in its gates, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Was Jerusalem destroyed because she was trampling upon God's holy Sabbath? Absolutely. This text needs to be studied along with the passage in Ezekiel. You see, the wine represents the counterfeit or apostate teachings of an apostate Christendom. It represents pagan practices that have come into the church. It represents doctrines that are contrary to Scripture. And unfortunately, we live in a world today, in a postmodern world, where truth doesn't matter very much anymore. People say, let's just get along. Let's just love one another. Let's not debate and talk about truth or doctrine. It doesn't make any difference. God says that it makes a difference, because he contrasts the wine with the truth of the first angel's message. In fact, do you know, folks, that the great trial at the end of time is going to be whether you accept the truth of God or whether you accept the counterfeit and the miracles that are performed by the Antichrist.